My son's fiancée told him her parents were dead. She said it at dinner, calmly, while her father was 45 minutes away in Worcester, a man who had spent 34 years on the same postal route and had mailed his daughter 43 letters without a single reply. I was sitting in my office when Marcus called to tell me, the coffee in my mug already cold, and something in the way he said toxic people made me stop typing. I had been an investigator for 31 years. I knew what a practiced lie sounded like. What he didn't know was that I'd already found her father alive, and I'd already decided he was going to walk through the door of that wedding. I drank it anyway and asked him to tell me everything she'd told him about them. He did. Every word was a lie. What he didn't know was that I'd already found her father alive, working at a marina 2 towns over, and I'd already invited him to the wedding. That conversation with Marcus happened on a Tuesday in late October. I remember the date because I had spent the previous evening clearing out the last of my wife's things from the hall closet 6 years after losing her, and still finding reasons to delay. Some things you don't finish. You just learn to walk past them. Marcus called me that evening, not to talk about the scarf or his mother or anything heavy. He called to tell me Evelyn's parents were gone, both of them. He said she'd mentioned it almost in passing. They'd been sitting at dinner somewhere on Newbury Street, and the subject of the wedding had come up, and she'd said, quietly, that her parents had passed, that they'd been difficult people, that she'd had to cut them out of her life years before they died, and that she'd made her peace with it, and that she hoped my family could be her family now. Marcus said she hadn't cried. He said she'd just looked at her plate for a moment, then looked back up at him and smiled and said, "I have you. That's enough." He told me this like it was proof of something admirable, and I suppose, if you didn't know what I know, if you hadn't spent 31 years in a small office on Tremont Street reading people for a living, you might have found it admirable too. The composed woman, the self-made woman, the woman who had survived hard things and come out on the other side with her chin up. Marcus had always been drawn to strength. He got that from his mother. I said, "That's a lot to carry." He said, "She doesn't carry it. That's what I'm saying. Dad, she's at peace with it." I told him I was glad to hear that. I said goodnight. Then I sat in my office for another hour with the cold coffee and thought about what it means when someone has no grief at all. I had met Evelyn Hartley 8 months before that phone call at a fundraiser for a children's hospital over in the Back Bay. Marcus had brought her to a family dinner 3 weeks after that, a Sunday, at my parents' house in Roslindale. The kind of dinner where my mother starts cooking at 10 in the morning and my father sits at the head of the table and makes pronouncements about the state of the world until someone changes the subject. There were 11 of us that night. Evelyn came in with a bottle of Greek wine she'd clearly done research to find, and when my mother, Eleni, who has never in her life pretended to be less than she is, asked her if she knew anything about Greek cooking, Evelyn said, very carefully, in Greek that was halting and clearly memorized, "Signomi, matenio." "I'm sorry. I'm learning." My mother put her hand on Evelyn's arm and said, "In English. You'll learn here." That was it. That was the moment. 11 people at that table, and every one of them softened. I watched it happen the way I used to watch juries, the small shift in posture, the loosening around the eyes. Evelyn had done her homework, and it had worked, and she knew it had worked, and she was gracious enough not to show that she knew. She helped my mother carry dishes from the kitchen without being asked. She listened to my father's story about his father's village outside Thessaloniki, a story the rest of us have heard 40 times, and she asked a follow-up question that made my father set down his fork and look at her with something close to respect. She was good. I want to be clear about that. She was genuinely good at it. Over the next several months, she became part of the rhythm of things. She came to Easter. She came to my cousin Daphne's birthday in the spring. She sat next to my mother at the table and learned to make spanakopita, or at least stood next to my mother while my mother made it and asked questions and wrote things down in a small notebook she carried in her bag. My mother told me, more than once, that Evelyn was a serious girl, coming from Eleni Papadopoulos. That was not a small thing. I liked her. I want to be honest about that too. In those early months, I liked Evelyn Hartley, and I thought my son had found someone worth finding. The first time the subject of her family came up in my presence, she was sitting at the kitchen table with my mother, and my mother had asked gently, the way she asks everything, whether Evelyn's parents were still living. Evelyn set down her pen. She looked at the notebook in front of her. She said, "I don't really like to talk about them." And she gave a small smile that was calibrated to communicate sadness without inviting follow-up. My mother said, of course," and moved on to the next recipe. And that was that. I was standing in the doorway. I noted the pause before the answer. I noted the smile. I noted that she hadn't answered the question. After 14 months of dating, Marcus proposed on a Saturday in September. He did it at the harbor, rented a small boat, which I thought was either very romantic or a significant logistical risk. But it worked. Evelyn said yes. They called me from the dock, both of them talking at the same time, and I could hear the water in the background and Marcus laughing. And I told them I was happy for them, which I was. The engagement party was at my parents' house 3 weeks later. 40 people, maybe 45. My Uncle Theo brought a bottle of ouzo that he'd been saving since 1987 and made a toast that lasted 6 minutes and covered, in no particular order, the importance of family, the Greek Civil War, and a piece of advice about marriage that I won't repeat here. Evelyn sat at the center of it all and laughed at the right moments and held Marcus's hand and looked, by every visible measure, like a woman who had found exactly where she belonged. It was at that party that someone first asked directly about her parents. Not maliciously. My cousin Andreas, who has no internal filter and never has, asked across the table whether Evelyn's family would be coming up from wherever they were for the wedding. Evelyn said her parents had passed. Andreas said he was sorry. The table moved on. But my father Stavros, who is 81 years old and has spent those 81 years developing an instinct for things that don't add up, caught my eye from across the room. He didn't say anything then. He said it to me later, in the kitchen. While I was washing glasses, he stood next to me and dried them with a dish towel and said, quietly, "Those people are somewhere, Dmitri. Bad people don't just disappear. They exist somewhere. You should know what you're walking into." I said, "She seems fine, Baba." He handed me a dry glass and said, "She seems fine. That's different." I put the glass on the shelf. I didn't argue with him, because my father has been right about people more times than I can count, and I have spent my career doing exactly what he was suggesting, finding the things that are somewhere, finding the people who exist somewhere, finding what's underneath the surface of a thing that seems fine. What I hadn't done yet was look. That changed the following Tuesday when Marcus called to tell me about the toxic people who were gone. I sat in my office after hanging up, and I thought about the pause before the answer, the small, calibrated smile, the notebook, the way she'd said, "I don't really like to talk about them," instead of "they passed away," which is what you say when someone has actually passed away, because the fact of their death is the simplest and most complete answer to the question. You don't deflect from a death. You state it. Unless you're deflecting from something else entirely. I opened my desk drawer. I took out a legal pad. I wrote her name at the top, Evelyn Hartley. Then I sat there for a long time, looking at it. My son was 34 years old. He had his mother's eyes and my stubbornness and a quality of goodness that I had watched him carry since he was a boy, the kind of goodness that makes a person easy to deceive because he extends to others the same good faith he himself deserves. Sophia used to say it was his best quality. She was right, and she was also right that it was the quality most likely to get him hurt. I had been an investigator for 31 years. I had found missing people, missing money, missing truths. I had sat across tables from people who were lying and watched their faces while they did it. I knew what a lie looked like when it was practiced, when it was comfortable, when it had been told so many times it had stopped feeling like a lie to the person telling it. I picked up the legal pad. I wrote a second line under her name. What does she know that she's not saying? Then I put the pad back in the drawer and went to make fresh coffee. I had a lot of work to do, and I had learned a long time ago, that the first thing you do when you start looking is make sure you're ready to find something. My father called me on a Thursday evening in early October, 6 weeks before the wedding. He didn't call to congratulate Marcus. He called to ask me to come to the house. Stavros Papadopoulos was 81 years old and had lived in the same house in Watertown for 53 years. He had come to this country from Thessaloniki with $40 and a suitcase that didn't close properly, and he had built everything he owned with his hands and his patience. He was not a man who called people to his house for small reasons. I arrived at 7. My mother had made coffee and set out a plate of koularakia, the way she always did when something serious needed to be discussed. She sat down at the table with us for exactly 2 minutes, then found a reason to be in the other room. She had always known when the men needed to talk. My father waited until he heard her in the kitchen. Then he looked at me across the table and said, "Tell me about this girl Marcus is marrying." I told him what I knew. I told him about Evelyn, how Marcus had met her at a fundraising event 2 years ago, how she had worked in non-profit administration, how she had become part of our Sunday dinners and learned to make spanakopita from my mother and laughed at Uncle Theo's jokes. I told him she seemed like a good woman. My father listened without interrupting. When I finished, he said, "And her family." I told him what Evelyn had told us, that her parents had died when she was in her early 20s, a car accident, that she had no siblings, that she had been alone for a long time before she found Marcus. My father was quiet for a moment. He picked up his coffee cup, looked into it, set it down. Then he said, "Dimitri, bad people don't disappear when they do something bad. They still exist somewhere. They still have an address." He looked at me directly. "Have you looked into this girl's family?" I said no. He said, "Then look, before the wedding." That was the entire conversation. He picked up a koularachi and broke it in half, and my mother came back into the room, and we talked about Marcus and the venue and whether the food would be enough for 93 people. But my father's words stayed with me the whole drive home. They sat in the passenger seat like a second person. I had spent 31 years as a private investigator. I had found missing people, missing money, missing truths. I knew how to look for things. More than that, I knew what it felt like when something didn't fit that particular friction between a story and the facts underneath it. Evelyn's story had always been smooth, too smooth. People who had lost their parents to tragedy carried that loss in specific ways, in silences, in small avoidances, in the way they sometimes looked at older couples. Evelyn never did any of that. She talked about her dead parents the way someone talks about a house they used to rent. Informative, distant, resolved. I had noticed it. I had told myself it was her way of coping. I drove home and sat in the car in my driveway for 11 minutes before going inside. I did not go to sleep for a long time. The call from Helen Chen came on a Tuesday, 1 week before the wedding. Helen and I had known each other since graduate school at Northeastern, back when I was still deciding between law and investigation, and she was studying urban planning and making very strong opinions about everything. We had stayed friends the way old friends do occasional dinners, holiday cards, calls when something happened that the other person needed to hear. She was reliable in exactly the way reliable people are. She called when she said she would call, and she said what she meant. She called at 11 in the morning. I was in my office reviewing an unrelated file. I picked up on the second ring. She said, "Dimitri, I need to ask you something, and I don't want to make trouble if there's nothing to make trouble about." I said, "Tell me." She said she had been at the Macy's in Natick the previous Saturday. She had been in the fabric section. She was making curtains for her new apartment, and she had been standing near a woman who was looking at upholstery samples. They had started talking, the way strangers sometimes do when they're both staring at the same bolts of cloth and neither one can decide. The woman had mentioned that her daughter was getting married the following weekend. Helen had congratulated her. And then, because Helen knew that Marcus was getting married and knew that I was Marcus's father and had met Marcus at a dinner I'd hosted the previous spring, she asked the woman her daughter's name. The woman said Evelyn. Helen said, "I remembered Marcus saying his fiancée's parents had passed away. I thought maybe I had the wrong person. But she described the wedding venue, Dmitri. She said the name of the venue. I did not say anything. Helen said, "Is everything all right?" I said, "You did the right thing calling me. Thank you." Helen. She said, "Dmitri." I said, "I'll take care of it." I ended the call. I set the phone down on the desk and looked at the window. Outside, a delivery truck was backing into the alley across the street. The driver had his arm out of the window, watching his mirror. I watched him for a moment. Then I looked back at the desk. 31 years. The truth was always in the details. A lie was always in the gaps. Evelyn had told us her parents were dead, and 1 week before her wedding, her mother was buying fabric at a department store and telling strangers her daughter was getting married. That was not a gap. That was a door left open. I did not call Marcus. I did not call my father. I did not call Helen back. I opened my laptop and went to the public records database I had used for 20 years. I typed in the name Hartley, cross-referenced with Worcester County, Massachusetts, Patricia and Robert Hartley. I had the address in 4 minutes. Worcester was 45 minutes from my office, depending on traffic on the pike. I wrote the address on a notepad. I looked at it for a moment. Then I tore the sheet off, folded it once, and put it in my shirt pocket. I had 1 week. I drove to Worcester on a Saturday morning, before the traffic on the pike had a chance to build. The address on the notepad put me on a street of small houses set close together, each one with a narrow front yard and a driveway wide enough for one car. Number 47 had dark green shutters and a row of marigolds along the front walk that someone had planted carefully, spaced evenly, the way a person plants flowers when they have time and intention, the kind of yard that tells you the people inside are not careless. I parked across the street and sat for a moment before getting out. There was a man in the front yard with a garden hose. He was watering the marigolds, moving slowly down the row, and he had the unhurried posture of someone who had done this particular thing many times. I recognized the build from the photographs I had found online. Robert Hartley, 61 years old, retired postal carrier, 34 years with the same route in Worcester's East Side. He was wearing a gray t-shirt and rubber-soled shoes. He did not hear me cross the street. When I reached the edge of his walk, he looked up. His face changed immediately, not to suspicion, but to something rawer than that. His eyes went to my face, then past me, toward the street, as if he expected someone else to be standing behind me, when no one was. His expression settled into something I recognized, disappointment that had learned to disguise itself as patience. "I'm not who you're hoping for," I said. "My name is Dimitri Papadopoulos. I'm the father of the man your daughter is going to marry." He stood very still. The hose ran water onto the concrete edge of the walk, and neither of us moved to stop it. Then he reached down and turned the nozzle off. "Come inside," he said. The living room walls were covered in photographs of Evelyn, not arranged in any formal gallery, just accumulated, the way families do it over decades, one frame at a time until the wall becomes a record. Evelyn at what looked like 4 or 5, gap-toothed, squinting into the sun. A school portrait from maybe 3rd grade, hair in 2 braids. A photograph of her at 16 or 17, arm around Robert's shoulder, laughing at something off camera. She looked easy in that photograph, comfortable, like a person who had not yet decided to become someone else. Patricia Hartley came in from the kitchen. She was a small woman with reading glasses pushed up on her head, and she looked at me with the careful expression of someone who had been surprised before and had learned not to show it entirely. She sat down across from me and set a birthday card on the coffee table between us. The envelope was unopened. In the upper left corner, someone had stamped "Return to sender address, not found." The return address was this house. The name written on the front was Evelyn. Her birthday was in March. Patricia said, "I sent it to the address she gave us before she stopped responding. It came back 2 weeks later." I looked at the card. I did not pick it up. "She blocked you?" I asked. Robert was sitting in the chair by the window. He nodded once. "About 8 months ago. She called first, said if we weren't willing to invest in her future, then we weren't part of it." He paused. "We had $15,000. She wanted $100,000 for the wedding. We told her we didn't have it. She said that was our answer." He looked at his hands. That was the last conversation. The room was quiet. Outside, a car passed slowly. "She told my son you were both dead," I said. Patricia made a sound that was not quite a word. Robert looked at the window. I let the silence sit for a moment. Then I said, "There is a wedding next Saturday. Your daughter will be there. I am asking if you would like to come." Robert looked at me directly for the first time since we had sat down. His face was not angry. It was the face of a man who had been waiting 8 months for a door to open and had not stopped watching for it. "I want to see my daughter," he said, "even just once more." "You will see her," I said, "and she will see you, and she will not be able to say otherwise." He nodded. I wrote down the address of the venue on the back of one of my cards and set it on the coffee table next to the unopened birthday envelope. Patricia looked at it but did not reach for it yet. I thanked them both and walked back out to my car. I sat behind the wheel for a moment before starting the engine. Through the front window, I could see Robert still standing in the living room, the card I'd left on the coffee table in his hand. He was reading it, the address of the venue, the date, the time. He read it twice. Then he folded it carefully and put it in his shirt pocket, the same pocket where he kept the laminated photograph of the three of them in summer sunlight. He looked up and saw me watching through the glass. He gave a single nod, not a question, not a maybe, a nod that said, "I will be there." I had driven 45 minutes to find a door that might be closed, and the door was open. That was the first thing that had gone exactly as I needed it to. I started the car. I did not smile, but I noted the feeling, the particular steadiness that comes when a thing you have planned meets the world and holds. The drive back from Worcester took 53 minutes. I know because I counted the traffic lights on Route 9 not deliberately, the way I used to count things on surveillance jobs, but because my hands were on the wheel and my mind needed something small to hold on to. 14 red lights, 3 construction delays, 1 detour around a water main break near the Newton City line. Marcus called at 7:14 in the morning, 11 days later, the day of the wedding. I was already dressed, dark suit, the one I'd worn to my own brother's funeral 6 years ago and had not worn since. My wife Elena had picked it out. She said charcoal gray was the color of a man who meant what he said. I'd had it cleaned twice since she died and never found a reason to wear it. This morning, I had taken it out of the plastic without thinking twice. The phone rang while I was standing at the kitchen counter with a cup of coffee I hadn't touched. I looked at the screen. Marcus. I picked up on the second ring. Baba. He only called me that when he was happy or when he was frightened. His voice told me which one this was. Evelyn just sent me a message. She said Baba. She said she reached out to her parents. She said they're coming today, to the wedding. I set the coffee cup down. The sound it made against the granite was very small and very precise. She said that, I said. She said she reached out to them. She said they reconciled. Baba. I know it's sudden, but she's been talking about it for weeks, about maybe trying to call them, and I think she finally did it. He paused. I could hear something in the background traffic, or a television, or the sound of a hotel room door closing. You don't sound surprised. I'm not surprised, I said. That was true. Tell me exactly what she wrote. He read it to me. I could hear him scrolling to find it, the small tap of his thumb on the screen. She wrote, "Babe, great news. I reached out to my parents. They're coming to the wedding. I'll explain everything after. I love you." I stood at the kitchen counter and looked at the window above the sink. The glass needed cleaning. There was a smear across the lower left corner that had been there since November, when I'd tried to wash the outside and hadn't reached far enough. She had written those words this morning, on the day of her wedding, after I had sat in Robert Hartley's living room 11 days ago and watched him read a birthday card his daughter had never opened. After Patricia Hartley had shown me the photograph on the mantel, Evelyn at 7 years old, gap-toothed, holding a stuffed rabbit, and told me she still bought her daughter a Christmas gift every year and left it in a box in the closet because she didn't know where else to put it. After Robert had said, very quietly, that he had mailed 43 letters to an address in Cambridge and received no reply to any of them. Evelyn had written great news at 7 in the morning on her wedding day. "Marcus," I said. "Yeah." "Are you happy about this?" He laughed the short, relieved laugh of a man who has been carrying something heavy and just set it down. Yeah, Baba, I'm really happy. I know it's complicated. I know there's stuff I don't understand yet. But if she's trying, if she's actually reaching out to them, that's what I wanted. That's what I've been hoping for." I let a moment pass. Outside, a car moved slowly down the street, its tires making a sound like paper tearing. "We will see," I said. "What?" "I said we will see. Today, we will see everything." He was quiet for a second. "You okay, Baba?" "I'm fine," I said. "I'll see you at the venue. Don't be late. Your mother's family drives from Brookline. They are always late, and I need you at the door when they arrive." He laughed again, the ordinary laugh this time, the one that sounded like him at 12 years old. "Got it, love you, Baba." "I love you," I said. "Get dressed. Wear the blue tie, not the silver one." I ended the call and put the phone face down on the counter. She was still lying. That was the thing I needed to understand completely before I moved. Not that she had lied before I had known that for 11 days. Not that she was capable of it. I had understood that the afternoon Helen Chen mentioned meeting a woman named Patricia in the fabric store. A woman who had cried in the aisle over a pattern she'd found, who had said her daughter was getting married and she hadn't been invited. I had understood Evelyn's capacity for this the moment I'd driven to Worcester and seen the stack of unopened envelopes on Robert Hartley's coffee table, 43 letters with his handwriting on the outside, still sealed. What I needed to understand this morning was that she was still lying, active present tense, on the day of her wedding, with Marcus's voice in my ear, full of relief and gratitude. She had typed the words, "I reached out to my parents," and sent them without hesitation. She had written great news, as if it were true, as if she had done something generous and difficult, as if she deserved the relief in my son's voice. That told me everything I needed to know about how today would have gone if I had done nothing. Marcus would have waited. The ceremony would have passed. The dinner would have started. And at some point, an hour in, 2 hours in, Marcus would have looked toward the door and realized no one was coming, and Evelyn would have had an explanation ready, something about a flight delay or a sudden illness or a change of heart, and Marcus would have accepted it because he loved her and because he had no reason not to, and the lie would have stretched forward into their marriage like a crack in a foundation wall that no one looks at until the ceiling comes down. I picked the phone back up and dialed Robert Hartley. He answered on the first ring. "Mr. Papadopoulos." "Today is the day," I said. "Are you ready?" There was a pause, and in it I heard the particular quality of a man composing himself, not nervous, something older than nervous, careful. "I'm ready," he said. "I've been ready. I pressed my shirt last night. Patricia ironed it again this morning." Another pause. "She's not coming." "Patricia?" She thought about it, but she said she didn't want to. She didn't want Evelyn to feel cornered. She said one of us is enough. I thought about Patricia Hartley sitting at her kitchen table with a cup of tea, deciding that her daughter's first sight of family should not be overwhelming. That was a particular kind of love, the kind that measures its own weight and chooses to be smaller. "Patricia's right," I said. "One is enough for now." "Will she be—" He stopped, started again. "How do you think she'll react?" I looked at the window above the sink. The smear in the lower left corner caught the morning light at an angle that made it look almost deliberate, like something drawn there on purpose. "I don't know," I said. That was also true. I had spent 11 days thinking about this question, and I still did not know. I knew what Evelyn had done. I did not know what she would do when she saw her father walk into the room. I had theories, but theories are not the same as knowing, and I had learned that distinction 30 years ago In the first year, I worked as an investigator when I had been certain about something and been wrong. Here is what I need from you, I said. Come to the venue at 6:30. The ceremony starts at 5, dinner at 6. By 6:30, the room will be settled. People will be eating, and there will be enough noise that your entrance won't stop everything immediately. Park on the north side of the building. There's a small lot there, away from the main entrance. Text me when you arrive. I will come out and bring you in through the side door. When we enter the room, I will be walking with you. You do not need to say anything. You do not need to do anything. Just walk in. Let her see you. Robert was quiet for a moment, and then we will see what happens. He made a sound that might have been a laugh, short and dry, like a match being struck. You say that a lot. It's usually true, I said. What if she just denies it? What if she says she doesn't know me? I had thought about this too. It was the scenario that had kept me up until 2 in the morning 3 nights ago, sitting at the kitchen table with a glass of water and the photograph Robert had given me, the family photograph from 2004, the 3 of them in front of a house I recognized from Google Maps as the Worcester property. Evelyn in a red coat, Robert with his arm around Patricia's shoulder, all of them squinting into the summer sun. She won't, I said. How do you know? Because I've been watching people lie for 30 years, I said, and I know what happens when a lie meets the thing it was built to avoid. She won't deny it. She won't be able to. Another silence. Outside my kitchen window, a bird landed on the fence post at the edge of the yard and sat there without moving. Okay, Robert said finally. 6:30. North lot. I'll text you. One more thing, I said. Bring the photograph. The one from 2004. The one you showed me when I was there. The Christmas one, or the one in front of the house. Summer. Red coat. Yes, I have it. Keep it in your jacket pocket. Don't take it out unless I ask you to. All right. A pause. Mr. Papadopoulos. Yes. Thank you. I know you didn't have to do this. You could have let it go. It's not your business. Really? She's going to be your son's wife. And you could have just... He stopped. Thank you. I looked at the photograph on my own counter, the one I kept there, the one of Marcus at 8 years old, standing on the dock at my father's house in Gloucester, holding a fishing rod with both hands, grinning so wide you could count his teeth. Elena had taken that photograph. She had been laughing when she took it. I remembered, because Marcus had just told a joke that made no sense, and she had laughed anyway because she loved him completely and without condition. My son is a good man, I said. He deserves to know who he's marrying. That's all. I ended the call. I stood in the kitchen for another minute, not moving. The coffee on the counter had gone cold while I was on the phone. I picked it up and drank it anyway, all of it, in 4 swallows, without tasting it. Then I picked up the envelope from the counter. Robert had given it to me when I left Worcester, not the birthday card. That one stayed on his table, still sealed. This was something else, a smaller envelope, unsealed, with a single photograph inside. He had pressed it into my hand at the door and said, "In case you need it." I hadn't asked what he meant. I understood. I slid the photograph out and looked at it one more time. Robert, Patricia, and Evelyn. Summer 2004. Red coat. All 3 of them squinting into the sun. And Evelyn, who was 22 in this photograph, who had not yet changed her last name from Hartley to anything else, who had not yet decided that her parents were toxic or absent or whatever word she had used with Marcus. Evelyn was laughing, full and open, the way people laugh when they are not thinking about how they look. Her father's arm was around her shoulder. Her mother was standing close enough that their arms were touching. I put the photograph back in the envelope. I put the envelope in the inside pocket of my charcoal gray jacket, the one Elena had chosen, the one that was the color of a man who meant what he said. I picked up my keys. I did not know, standing in that kitchen, exactly what the next 12 hours would look like. I did not know how Evelyn would react when she saw her father. I did not know whether Marcus would be angry at me or grateful or something else entirely, something without a clean name. I did not know whether Robert Hartley would be able to hold himself together when he walked into that room, or whether he would simply stand in the doorway and cry, which would be its own kind of truth and its own kind of evidence. What I knew was this: Evelyn had sent my son a message this morning that said great news, and I reached out to my parents, and they're coming to the wedding. She had typed those words and pressed send. She had let Marcus feel relief and happiness and hope, all of it built on something that was not true, and she had done it on the morning of their wedding without hesitation. I had been an investigator for 26 years. I had watched people lie in police interviews, in depositions, in hospital rooms, in parking lots. I had watched people lie to their spouses and their employers and their attorneys and their children. I had watched people lie to themselves so thoroughly that they could no longer tell the difference between the lie and the thing it had replaced. I had never stopped being troubled by it. That was the thing people got wrong about men who did what I did. They assumed the work made you cold to it, immunized you. It didn't. What it gave you was not coldness, but precision. The ability to observe without reacting, to wait, to let the lie finish building itself before you showed the person what it looked like from the outside. That was what today was. I locked the front door behind me. I walked to the car. The morning was clear and cold for June, the kind of cold that comes from the ocean when the wind is right, and I could smell its salt and distance. The particular smell of Boston in early summer that I had known since I was a boy, and that still, after all these years, made me think of my father's hands and my mother's kitchen, and the specific weight of belonging to a place so completely that it becomes part of your body. I got in the car, I put the key in the ignition and did not turn it yet. On the passenger seat, I placed the envelope, Robert's photograph of 3 people standing in summer sunlight, all of them still intact, still a family, not yet knowing what was coming. I looked at it for a moment. Then I started the car and pulled out of the driveway and drove toward the venue and did not look back. The restaurant was called Athena's Table, which my mother had chosen because she said it was a sign, and my mother believed in signs. It occupied the second floor of a building on Newbury Street, with tall windows that looked out over the public garden, and the staff had been setting up since morning. I had driven past it twice in the last week, once at night when the windows were dark, and once at noon when the florists were carrying in arrangements of white roses and eucalyptus. I knew the room. I knew the exits. I knew where Robert would wait. I arrived at 4:15. The ceremony was at 5, the dinner reception to follow. I parked on Marlborough Street and sat in the car for 3 minutes with the engine off. The envelope was still on the passenger seat. I left it there. The room, when I walked in, smelled like flowers and heated bread, and the particular kind of nervous energy that collects in a space where people are trying very hard to feel something appropriate. Round tables with white linen, tall candles not yet lit. My mother was already seated at the family table near the center, her good black dress and her good pearl earrings, talking to my cousin Sophia about something that made them both laugh. My father, Stavros, sat beside her with his hands folded on the table, watching the room the way he had always watched rooms, quietly, from the corners of his eyes, as if the room were telling him something it didn't know it was saying. He looked at me when I walked in. I gave him nothing. He nodded once, very slightly, and looked away. Marcus was near the front, talking to the officiant, a man named Father Petros, who had known our family for 20 years. Marcus had his father's shoulders and his mother's eyes, and he was wearing the dark suit I had helped him pick out in March, and he looked like a man who believed entirely in the afternoon he was standing in. I watched him for a moment. He laughed at something Father Petros said, and the laugh was real. I sat down. Evelyn arrived 8 minutes later through a side entrance with her bridesmaids, and the room shifted the way rooms do when a bride enters a small collective intake, a turning of heads. She was wearing her dress, a simple ivory thing with a long back, and she looked beautiful in the way that people look beautiful when they have arranged everything carefully. She moved through the room, greeting guests, touching arms, smiling. She kissed my mother on both cheeks. She squeezed Sophia's hand. She was performing warmth, and she was very good at it. I'd watched her do it for 14 months. What I noticed was the door. Every 30 seconds or so, her eyes moved to it. Not dramatically, just a flicker, the way a person looks at a clock when they are waiting for something that may not come. The ceremony was 22 minutes long. Father Petros spoke about covenant and patience and the particular grace of two people choosing each other in full knowledge of what that choice costs. Marcus cried, briefly, at the vows. Evelyn did not cry. She held his hands and looked at him with an expression I had studied enough times to know was constructed rather than felt not cold, not absent, but deliberate. The way an actor holds an expression because they know the camera is on them. I did not cry. I counted the candles. There were 16. After the ceremony, during the transition to dinner, Evelyn came to stand beside Marcus at the family table. She leaned close to him and said something I was not meant to hear, but I was sitting 2 feet away, and I have spent 30 years learning to listen to things not meant for me. She said, "Babe, I'm a little worried. My parents haven't arrived yet. Maybe they're running late, or maybe," she stopped. "Maybe they changed their minds." Marcus put his hand over hers. "It's okay. We have each other. That's what matters." She nodded and pressed her lips together and looked at the door again. I picked up my water glass and drank from it and set it down. My Uncle Theo was seated to my left, a large man, 71 years old, who had been a merchant sailor for 2 decades and had the particular directness of someone who had spent long months in small spaces with people he could not avoid and had learned that the most efficient solution to ambiguity was to simply ask. He leaned across me at one point during the salad course and said to Evelyn, pleasantly, "So where are your parents? I was looking forward to meeting them." Evelyn looked at him. Something moved behind her eyes, very quickly, and was gone. "They couldn't make it," she said. "I just told Marcus. They had a conflict." "A conflict," Theo said. He was not being unkind. He was simply repeating the word the way he repeated things when they didn't quite fit the shape of what he expected. "On your wedding day." "It happens," Evelyn said and smiled and turned back to her plate. I noted 3 things. First, this morning, the message Marcus had shown me without knowing what it meant. "Babe, great news. I reached out to my parents. They're coming to the wedding. Had said they were coming. Second, 20 minutes ago. She had said they might be running late, might have changed their minds. Third, now they had a conflict. 3 versions of the same story, each one issued as the previous version became untenable. A person who is simply nervous tells one story badly. A person who is managing information tells 3 stories smoothly. I set down my fork. I waded through the main course. I waded through the toasts my father's, which was short and precise and ended with a Greek proverb about patience that made half the room laugh and the other half nod. I waded through Marcus's toast to Evelyn, which was long and genuine and made my mother press a handkerchief to her eye. I watched Evelyn's face during that toast. She looked at Marcus the way you look at something you have acquired, something valuable, something you are not entirely sure you deserve but have decided to keep anyway. At 8:47, during the interval before the cake, I stood up. I did not say anything to anyone at the table. I picked up my jacket from the back of my chair and walked toward the side hallway that led to the service corridor and the stairs. My father watched me go. He said nothing. He understood that there are moments when the right thing to do is be very still and let the person who has prepared something allow it to arrive. Robert was standing in the corridor outside the fire door at the base of the stairs. He had been there since 8 o'clock, by my instruction. He was wearing a blue Oxford shirt, pressed, and dark trousers, and his hands were at his sides, and he was not moving at all. He had the stillness of a man who has been waiting for something for a very long time and has learned to wait without spending himself. When I came through the door, he looked at me. "Is it time?" he said. "It's time," I said. "Walk in through the main entrance. Don't hurry, don't announce yourself, just walk in." He looked at me for a moment. His eyes were the kind of gray that gets lighter with age, and they were very clear. He said, "She's going to be frightened." "Yes," I said. "I'm not coming to frighten her," he said. "I need you to know that." "I know that," I said. "She needs to know it too. But she can't know it until she sees you." He nodded. He straightened his collar with both hands. He took one breath, the kind that goes all the way down, and then he walked toward the main entrance. I went back up the stairs and into the room through the side door and returned to my seat. I picked up my water glass. Evelyn was speaking to one of her bridesmaids across the table, something about the cake, and she was smiling, and her eyes went to the main door one more time. Then she turned to Marcus and said, quietly, but not quietly enough, "Babe, I don't think they're coming. My parents, I think something came up. I think we just have to accept it." She gave a small, practiced exhale, the sound of a woman releasing something gracefully, in public, in a way that invited sympathy rather than questions. Marcus put his hand over hers. He looked at me. I picked up my water glass. I said, without raising my voice, "Actually, he's on his way in now." Evelyn's hand went still under Marcus's. She looked at me. I did not look at her. I set the glass down and turned toward the door. The door opened. The room did not go silent all at once. It went silent in a wave, starting at the tables nearest the entrance and moving inward, the way a stone dropped in water sends its rings outward. But in this case, the rings moved inward, toward the center, toward us. I watched it happen. I watched the heads turn, one after another, and then the talking stop, and then the particular quality of attention that a room produces when something has entered it that does not belong to the occasion. Robert Hartley walked in. He was 63 years old and had spent 34 years sorting mail in Worcester, Massachusetts. And he walked the way men walk when they have not spent their lives being looked at, a little uncertain of the space, a little too aware of his own footsteps, but moving forward anyway because the alternative was to stop. He was holding his hat in both hands, turning it slowly, and his face was doing something that faces do when they are trying to be composed and are not entirely succeeding. He looked around the room. He was looking for one person. He found her. I was watching Evelyn when it happened. I had positioned myself for exactly this, seated at an angle where I could see both the door and her face simultaneously. I had learned, in 30 years of investigative work, that the moment of recognition is the only moment that cannot be performed. Everything else, grief, anger, contrition, love, can be constructed. Recognition cannot. It arrives before the mind can intercept it. She saw him. The color left her face the way it leaves when the body understands something before the mind does. Not a dramatic blanching, a quiet one, like a lamp turned down slowly. Her hands, which had been resting on the table, went very still. Her mouth, which had been forming a word for her bridesmaid, did not complete it. She stood up from her chair, not dramatically, not running, just rising, the way a person rises when they are not sure yet whether to move toward something or away from it, and the body cannot decide. She did not speak. Marcus was beside her. He had not yet seen Robert. His back was partially to the door, and he looked at Evelyn's face, and then followed her gaze, and then looked at the man standing near the entrance holding his hat. And I watched Marcus work through it. He was not slow. He had his father's instincts, even if he had not wanted to use them in this case. He looked at Robert. He looked at Evelyn. He looked at Robert again. He said, "Evelyn." She did not answer him. The room was entirely quiet now. 64 people who had come to celebrate a marriage were watching a man walk slowly across the floor toward the bride, and the bride was standing with her hands at her sides and her face the color of the white linen on the tables, and she was not saying anything. Uncle Theo, to my left, had set down his fork. Robert reached the edge of the family table. He stopped. He looked at his daughter across 3 feet of white tablecloth and tall candles and the remains of a wedding dinner, and his face was doing the thing that faces do when they have rehearsed a moment for years, and the moment has arrived, and all the rehearsal falls away, and there is only the raw fact of it. He said very quietly, so that only the nearest tables could hear, "My girl, I've missed you so much." Evelyn looked at him. And then she sat back down in her chair and put both hands over her face. She did not cry loudly. She did not speak. She did not explain. She simply covered her face with her hands, and her shoulders moved once, and then she was still. The room remained quiet. Someone near the back coughed softly and was immediately silent again. My mother had her hand pressed to her mouth. My father, Stavros, was looking at the table in front of him with the expression of a man who has been told a thing he already knew and is not surprised, but is still, despite everything, affected by the confirmation. Marcus said her name again. Evelyn. Not a question this time. Just her name. Said the way you say a name when you are trying to locate a person who has been somewhere you couldn't see. She still did not look at him. I did not speak. I had not spoken since the corridor. I picked up my water glass and drank from it and set it down on the white linen and looked at the candles. 16 of them, all burning. None of them moved by any draft because the windows were closed and the room was very still. Robert was still standing at the edge of the table. He had not moved. He was looking at his daughter with an expression that was not anger and was not accusation and was not triumph. It was simply the expression of a man who has driven 2 hours to stand in a room and look at his child and has arrived, finally, at the thing he came for. He turned his hat over once more in his hands. He waited. Her silence was not the silence of someone who had been caught and was calculating what to say next. I had watched people calculate for 30 years, and I knew what that looked like, the small movements, the eyes going sideways, the mouth beginning to form and then stopping. This was different. This was the silence of someone who had arrived at the end of a long construction and found nothing left to build with. Every version of the story had been told. Every door had been closed. Her father was standing in the room, and the room had seen him, and there was no fourth version of the story available. Her silence was the admission. Marcus looked at me. He looked at me the way a person looks at someone when they understand that the person has known something for longer than they have, and the understanding is not yet accusation, just the first cold recognition of the shape of things. I met his eyes. I did not look away. I did not explain. I set my napkin on the table, folded along its original crease, and waited. Robert did not move toward her immediately. He stood in the doorway of the reception hall the way a man stands when he has waited a very long time for something and does not trust himself to rush it. His hands were at his sides. He was wearing the gray suit I had noticed when he opened his front door in Worcester 3 weeks ago, pressed carefully. The kind of careful that takes time. Patricia was beside him, one step back, her hand at her throat. Evelyn made a sound I had not heard before. Not a word, not a name. Something before words. The kind of sound that comes when the body understands something the mind is still refusing. She said, "Dad." Robert took 3 steps forward. He did not speak. He put his arms around her, and she collapsed into him, the way a person collapses when they have been holding something up for a very long time, and someone finally takes the weight. The room was quiet, not the quiet of discomfort, the quiet of people who understand they are watching something real and do not want to disturb it. Marcus stood beside me. I could feel him not moving. His hands were flat on the tablecloth. He was watching his fiancée weep in the arms of a man she had told him was dead, and the mathematics of that were working through him slowly, the way cold works through a building, finding every gap, every place where the insulation had failed. I did not say anything. I had learned, in 31 years of investigative work, that the moment after revelation is not the moment for explanation. The moment after revelation belongs to the people in it. My job had been to arrange the room. The room had been arranged. What happened in it now was not mine to narrate. Uncle Theo, 3 tables away, set down his glass of Retsina. He looked at me across the room. He had been the one, 4 months ago, who had asked Evelyn directly about her family at Sunday dinner, the question she had answered with practiced grief. Her eyes lowered, her voice soft. He had believed her then. He looked at me now and said nothing. He picked up his glass again. Patricia moved past Robert and stood in front of her daughter. She was a small woman with gray hair cut close to her face, and she looked at Evelyn the way my mother used to look at things she was trying to memorize carefully, completely, as if she might not get another chance. She reached up and touched Evelyn's face with both hands. She said, very quietly, "We've been waiting." Evelyn said, "I know." She was crying in a way that made conversation difficult. "I know. Mom, I know." Marcus said, "Evelyn." She turned. Her face was wet. Her lipstick had gone. She looked, for the first time since I had known her, like someone who could not manage the room she was standing in. He said, "Why did you tell me they were dead?" She opened her mouth. She closed it. She tried again. "I was ashamed," she said. "I was ashamed of where I came from. I wanted to be someone else. I thought if I started over, if nobody knew, I could be different. I could be who I wanted to be." Marcus looked at her for a long moment. His jaw was set. He had his mother's jaw. I had always thought that. In the years since Elena died, he said, "You are someone else. You're a liar." He reached down and took her left hand. He slid the ring off her finger with 2 careful movements. The way you remove something fragile from a shelf. He held it for a moment, then placed it on the table. He did not say anything else. He stepped back 1 step and stood there, and the distance between them, which had been nothing an hour ago, was now something that could be measured. Evelyn looked at the ring on the table. She did not reach for it. Robert had watched all of this. He reached into the breast pocket of his gray suit and produced a small laminated card, the kind of card people keep in a wallet when they want to protect something from wear. He held it out to his daughter. She took it with both hands. It was a photograph. Small, worn at the edges despite the lamination. Robert, younger by 20 years, standing in a backyard I recognized from the house in Worcester, Patricia beside him in a yellow dress, and between them, a girl of perhaps 7 or 8, squinting into the sun, holding an ice cream cone that was already beginning to melt down her wrist. The girl was grinning. She had no idea the ice cream was melting. She was completely, unguardedly happy. Robert said, "Who is that?" Evelyn looked at the photograph. She did not answer. He said, "That's your family. That's the people who love you. That's who you decided to bury." His voice was not angry. It was something worse than angry. It was patient. The voice of a man who had rehearsed grief for long enough that it had become simply the way he spoke. "Why did you deny us?" Evelyn looked at the photograph for a long time. The room had gone very still around her. My mother, Eleni, was at the table nearest the window, her hands folded in her lap. She had cooked with Evelyn in her kitchen. She had taught her the oregano to lemon ratio for the lamb. She was looking at her tablecloth now, at nothing in particular. Evelyn did not answer Robert's question. She held the photograph and cried, and her crying was the only answer she had. And it was not enough, not for Robert, not for Patricia, not for the room, but it was all she had left. I stood up. I did not make an announcement. I did not say goodbye to the room. I found my jacket on the back of my chair, picked up my car keys from the table, and walked toward the exit along the far wall, away from the center of the room. My father, Stavros, was near the door. He was 81 years old, and he had been watching the entire proceeding from his chair with the expression of a man who has seen enough of the world to recognize its patterns. He looked at me as I passed. He put one hand briefly on my arm. I did not wait to hear Evelyn's apology. Whatever she said next, whatever explanation she assembled from the wreckage of the evening, was not something I needed to be present for. I had done what I came to do. The rest belonged to Marcus, to Robert and Patricia, to whatever Evelyn could build from what remained. The parking lot was cold and quiet. October in Boston does not negotiate. I found my car, sat in the driver's seat for a moment, and called my father's cell phone. He had gone back inside, but he always picked up. He answered on the second ring. I said, "You were right. You told me last spring that bad people don't disappear. They just find somewhere to stand where the light doesn't reach them." He said, "Did Marcus see it?" I said, "He saw it." He said, "Good." A pause. "Are you driving home?" I said, "Yes." He told me to drive carefully. I drove carefully. The call with Marcus came 4 days later. He called at 8 in the morning, which was his habit when he had something serious to say. He had always been clear in the morning. Since he was a boy, I was at my desk with coffee when the phone rang. He said, "Dad, I canceled it. All of it. The venue, the photographer, the catering deposit. I called the registrar's office Monday morning." A pause. "I'm not marrying her." I said, "I know. That's the right decision." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "How long did you know about the lie?" I told him the truth. I told him about Helen Chen calling me in September, how she had mentioned casually, between sentences, about something else entirely, that she had run into a woman at the grocery store on Calm Ave who had shown her photographs of her daughter's engagement, and the daughter in the photographs was Evelyn, and the woman's name was Patricia Hartley, and she was alive and shopping for soup in the canned goods aisle of a supermarket on a Tuesday afternoon. Marcus said, "And you didn't tell me." I said, "No." He said, "Why?" I said, "Because you needed to see it yourself. The truth had to come from your own eyes, not from my words. If I had told you, you would have had a conversation with Evelyn, and she would have had an explanation, and you would have wanted to believe the explanation because you loved her. That's not a criticism. That's just what love does. You needed to see her father walk through that door. You needed to watch her face when he did. No one could give you that. You had to be in the room." He didn't respond immediately. I could hear him breathing on the other end of the line. Finally, he said, "I keep thinking about the ring. I keep thinking about putting it on the table." I said, "That was the right thing to do." He said, "It didn't feel like anything. I thought it would feel like something." I said, "Sometimes the right things don't feel like anything at the time. The feeling comes later." He said he would come for dinner Sunday. I told him my mother was already planning the lamb. The email from Evelyn arrived 11 days after the wedding. It was long, 4 paragraphs, and carefully written, the kind of email that has been drafted and revised several times before sending. She explained that she had grown up ashamed of her family's circumstances, that she had reinvented herself when she moved to Boston at 23, that the lie had begun as something small and had calcified over years into something she could no longer dismantle without losing everything she had built. She said she understood if Marcus could not forgive her. She said she was going to call her parents. She said she was sorry. She did not address the email to me specifically. She sent it to my general contact address, the one on my old investigative firm's website, which I had not updated in 6 years. I read it once. I did not read it again. I moved it to the trash folder, and then I emptied the trash, which is something I do at the end of every day, regardless. What happened to Evelyn in the weeks after, I learned in pieces not because I was looking, but because a city like Boston is smaller than it appears when you have lived in it long enough. The nonprofit where she had worked, a children's literacy organization in the South End, had relied heavily on the Papadopoulos family's annual donation, a contribution my father had made for 11 consecutive years. He did not renew it. The executive director, a woman named Carol Stavridis, who had known my mother since the early 90s, called my father in November to ask whether there had been a change in circumstances. My father told her, briefly and without embellishment, what had happened at the wedding. Evelyn was asked to resign 2 weeks later. The reason given was a restructuring of staff roles. The actual reason was that Marcus Papadopoulos' name appeared on 3 of their donor acknowledgement plaques, and the board had made a calculation. I did not arrange this. I want to be clear about that. I made no calls, sent no letters, said nothing to Carol Stavridis or anyone on that board. What I had done was invite Robert Hartley into a room with 64 people, and 64 people had seen what they had seen, and the world had drawn its own conclusions from that. The Greek community on the South Shore is not large, and it does not forget quickly. By December, Evelyn had stopped appearing at the events where she had once been welcomed. The invitations did not stop arriving, they simply stopped being answered, and after a time, they stopped arriving too. She had built an identity in this city on the foundation of a family she had invented, and the foundation had been removed. What she built on top of it was now her own problem to solve. In January, my mother called me on a Sunday evening. She said she had something to tell me and that I should not make a fuss about it. She said she had invited Robert and Patricia Hartley to dinner the following Sunday. She said she had spoken with Patricia on the phone for 40 minutes and that Patricia had cried and that she, Eleni Papadopoulos, had also cried, which she reported as a simple fact and not as a thing requiring comment. She said Patricia made a very good tiropita and had offered to bring one. My mother said she had told her to bring two. I said that sounded right. She said, "These people lost their daughter for 8 years. The least we can do is feed them." I said yes. She said dinner was at 2 o'clock and I should not be late. I told her I would not be late. I was not late. Some truths, when revealed, cannot be denied. The room had seen Robert Hartley walk through the door. The room had seen Evelyn's face. That was not something that could be revised or explained away. It was simply what had happened, and it would remain what had happened regardless of what Evelyn wrote in an email at 11 days' distance. Some lies, when revealed, cannot be forgiven immediately. That was not cruelty. That was just the nature of the thing. Forgiveness, if it came, would come on Marcus's schedule, not mine, and not Evelyn's. I was not angry at her. I want to be precise about that. Anger requires a kind of investment I had not made. What I had made was an observation, and then a decision, and then a drive to Worcester, and then a phone call to a man named Robert Hartley, who had worked for the Postal Service for 34 years and kept a laminated photograph in his breast pocket. The rest had followed from those things. I was not angry. I was finished. On my desk, in the corner nearest the window, there is a photograph in a dark wood frame. Elena and I are standing in the backyard of this house, the house we bought in 1991, the house where Marcus grew up, the house where Elena died in the back bedroom on a Tuesday morning in March, 11 years ago. Marcus is in the photograph too. He is 4 years old. He is standing between us with both arms raised, the way children raise their arms when they want to be picked up, and both of us have reached down at the same moment to take his hands. And the three of us are connected in that way, that simple chain of hands. And whoever took the photograph, I no longer remember who caught the moment before anyone moved. I looked at that photograph for a while. Then I set it back in its place, turned to the papers on my desk, and returned to work. There was nothing left to arrange. If you've ever stood in a quiet room holding something that couldn't be undone, and chosen to set it down gently instead of throwing it, you already understand why the photograph stayed on the desk, and why that was enough. These are the stories I keep. If they find something true in you, I'll be here.